Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I would turn your attention next to politics on a slightly broader stage. We haven't actually piled in on Brexit for a while, and we're not going to pile in now. We need to find a way in 2017 to have constructive and meaningful conversations about the country's future that don't involve slanging matches and ludicrous kind of nicknames and silly sort of sniping. It's time for the country to come together again, and what it needs for that to happen at this point in proceedings, I do not know. But this is crucial. I should tell you actually that if you heard that phone call from the elderly lady, or older lady in, why did I say older? From the lady in Chester shortly after the referendum vote, the lady who was German-born but had lived here for practically all of her adult life, married to the local GP up there. Karen was her name, and it was a heartbreaking call. I can tell you, I got a Christmas card off her yesterday, and she's all right. She seems to be sort of bouncing in a much better, in a much better place than she was when she rang in. And I know she listens most days. She told me that, so I know that you won't mind me passing on all the love and good feeling and good wishes at Christmas time that you sent to her at the end of June when she rang in to tell us how her neighbours up there were treating her for being German, for being a European. After that referendum result came in, Bernard Hogan-Howe as well talking this morning about the massive rise in hate crimes. But that's why I think we need to find a way to come together. But let's move slightly away from that for now and return to the question of moral duty. Do you know what morality is? Do you know what an act of moral value involves? In my not very humble opinion, I think something is, and this is something definitely you get from Christianity. I presume you get it from other religions as well. It's only really morally valuable if it involves some sort of sacrifice on your part. Do you know what I mean? Like sharing. Sharing is probably the most moral thing of all, isn't it? Because there is a universe in which you'd like to keep all the sweets for yourself. And that's the universe in which most of us live. Can I have a sweet? Think about school. Can I have a sweet? Think of all the different reactions. It's almost like a Pantone colour chart. All the different reactions that a human being will have if they're carrying around a bag of minstrels and you ask her for one. Yeah, of course you can. That's absolutely fine. Yeah, all right. Yeah, all right, but I'm going to hold the bag really tightly so that you can only get one minstrel out, because otherwise you might just take out 4 and then I'll only have 14 left. I mean, I could stay here all day, actually. I could do a whole hour on this, of all the different reactions to a simple request for some generosity. Would you, can I have, it's a bit like the kind of notion that, in my not very humble opinion, supporting higher tax rates for higher earners is a lot more impressive when it comes from a higher earner than when it comes from somebody who wouldn't be affected by it. So I think if you're trying to, you can pick up on that. We can do the semantics of this as well, because a slight end of term feel, even though we're here for another week and a half, the Christmas cheer is building. So there's a slight end of term feel to proceedings at the moment, and that it really intrigues me. What is a morally good act? It's got to be something that in some way, but then you might come away feeling all smug and self-congratulatory. So you could argue that it wasn't a morally good act because you're so busy patting yourself on the back for doing it that it wasn't actually a sacrifice at all, but was in a sense quite self-serving. Oh, what on earth is he talking about now? Talking about the EU. Talking about a House of Lords report. Okay, so this is it comes from our own Parliament. It describes a heavy moral obligation to reassure European Union nationals that they will not be forced to leave Britain at the time of Brexit. Okay? Now, at risk of sort of spiking the switchboard's guns, the obvious response to this, dare I say the slightly knee-jerky response to this, is, well, it depends what they do with our citizens in the EU. And yes, that's politically astute, probably not correct, definitely. But it completely ignores the phrase that I want you to focus on. Heavy moral obligation. So there's nothing moral about market trading. There's nothing moral about horse trading. There's nothing moral about saying, well, I'll do that if you do that. A heavy moral obligation implies that it is important for you to do something, regardless of whether it benefits you or harms you. Now, I happen to believe that issuing an assurance to all EU nationals that were here prior to the referendum vote, prior to the actual Brexit, is going to benefit us, but we won't have that argument today. We'll have that argument another day, and another day, and another day, and another day, till the end of time. But the question of whether or not we do, or Theresa May does have a heavy moral obligation. She refused quite early on. That was one of the scary moments for me, back when I was still sort of clinging to the notion that the predictions of horror and hate would not come true. And then Theresa May effectively refused very early on in her premiership to tell your children's Italian classmates, or your Spanish colleague, or your Polish friend, or your French drinking buddy. Theresa May effectively declined to tell them, even if they'd lived here for 10, 20, 30 years, Theresa May effectively declined to tell them that they were welcome. That's why I refer back to that call. I'll tweet it, actually. I see that the office have just put that call out again in case you missed it the first time round. She declined to tell them they were safe here. They declined to tell them that their home of 20 years would be their home after everything changes. And I thought that was a real shame, especially when she was talking about being the daughter of a vicar and Christianity at the time. I really did. And the notion of these people becoming bargaining chips with which we somehow safeguard the future of British people in European Union countries, it has logic, but morality can sometimes be illogical. It's the kind of point of the whole programme today, and I appreciate I'm doing it quite clumsily, but I like to think that the clouds are clearing ever so slightly. A moral obligation to do more in Syria, a moral obligation to offer up safety, to offer up reassurances to European Union nationals who live here. I don't know that there was a moral obligation to intervene in Syria, but I do think there's a moral obligation to do this for the very simple reason. I think even UKIP, didn't I see something on Twitter yesterday that UKIP's policy was that all the people who were here at the time of Brexit would be welcome to stay? I mean, obviously this caused an enormous uproar among their own followers and their own fans. But you know, that's, I mean, if even UKIP come out and say that, then surely Theresa May, albeit that the difference between UKIP and Theresa May is that Theresa May actually has to be held accountable for her actions. She can't just scream stuff from the sidelines and then go and hide in Donald Trump's lift. There is a duty. There is a moral obligation. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And if you don't think there is a moral obligation, tell me why. Why on earth would you want to live? And I'm not going to sort of mask my feelings on this one. Why would you want to live or be part of a country that is reserving the right to tell somebody who's lived here for 30 years, paid taxes here for 30 years, educated their children, raised their family here? Why would you want to live in a country that didn't tell them they're all right? Yeah, I guess your answer might be, well, no, I would be all right with them, James, but I don't want someone who's only been here for 6 months to be told they can stay. Give me a call. Talk me through why. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. A heavy moral obligation, according to the House of Lords. And this, the key phrase here, is unilateral undertaking. We're not looking too clever in the eyes of the world at the moment, or rather, we're not looking too nice. I appreciate that the anti-Brexit populism may translate into Islamophobia in the Dutch election or into out-and-out fascism in the French election. That's the way of the world. Humanity throughout time has been motivated more by hate than love. You've just got this little window after the Second World War, what you could loosely describe as the second half of the 20th century, where somehow we managed to screw a lid down on all the hatred and all the anger, all the bitterness and all the scapegoating. But it's back with a vengeance. Don't know where it's going to lead. That's fine. But a unilateral undertaking would announce to the world, not just the European Union, that we're not actually turning our back on our heritage. We're not actually turning our back on British values. We're not becoming a kind of, what would you describe it as? Becoming a bitter, shriveled hull of a country. We're still looking outwards. We're still international in ambition and in scope, and we're still a place that people should want to come to because we're still brilliant. unilateral declaration, a unilateral undertaking that citizenship rights will be safeguarded when Britain quits the EU. So I want your thoughts on that. 0345 6060 973. But I also, as ever on this programme, I want to know what it's like to be living in the middle of this story. Maybe I'm getting my knickers in a twist on your behalf for no reason. Yeah? What's it like to be a European Union citizen and actually wondering what the future holds for you? This is an area in which we haven't really expended much energy at all. We've gone for the extreme examples, like my friend in Chester, and that's absolutely inevitable. If you have a vulnerable older lady who is being abused by her neighbours, then that's a shame to all of us. So you go to the extreme, right? But what about the absolutely unextreme? What about the people you know, the people that you've talked to today but you haven't had this conversation with? You know, what about your hairdresser or your accountant or whoever it may be, the German, the Frenchman, the Portuguese, the Pole, the Romanian? Yeah, I'm so sorry that I haven't asked you how you feel about this lack of clarity. What's it like not to know whether or not, in some cases, the only home you've really known is still going to be your home after we leave the European Union? God, I've done that completely the wrong way around, that introduction, haven't I? It's nothing to do with how we feel about you being offered to stay here. It's about how you currently feel about not knowing whether you will. What's that like? 0345 6060 973. And then, how do the rest of us feel, those of us blessed with some certainty about our status post-Brexit, about the suggestion that there's a heavy moral obligation to look after these people? It's 11:15. There is, of course, a heavy moral obligation to reassure European nationals that they will not be forced to leave Britain. Just listen to the language, forced to leave Britain at the time of Brexit. Of course there is, but this is 2016. Heavy moral obligation has been overtaken in almost every sense by sort of sneering sound bites from the sidelines. The hecklers have moved onto the stage, discovered that they have absolutely no idea how to mount a proper performance, but they've got rid of all the professional actors, so they're just going to sort of stand there drinking beer and smoking, I suppose. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. What do you think? Bob is in Winchmore Hill. Bob, two things. First of all, do you have any young people in your life?
I have, yes.
Do they find your name in any way amusing?
Yeah, so everything about me I find amusing, especially at the moment, so I'm growing a beard, so I look like Father Christmas.
I had a car full of 10-year-olds the other day who, for reasons I still haven't properly unravelled, considered the name Bob to be the funniest thing they'd ever heard in their life.
Well, because of course there's a character in Blackadder.
Yeah, but my girls, they're 10. They've not seen. They've not. I mean, he's brilliant. But anyway, I digress slightly, Bob.
I've been known as Robert, but
of course.
When I ended up in the fire service, they always called me Bob. So that was it.
Bob.
Yeah.
What did you ring in to tell us, Robert?
Well, I was just going to say I listen to you every morning, and I agree mostly what you say, and I disagree with some.
Yes.
What you've done today is unique.
Go on.
Within 15 seconds, I've done a complete change in views. I've been saying to my friends and colleagues, and I've been saying, no, we obviously can't show our hand early on. Can't say we're going to keep the Europeans here at the moment because they don't know what they're going to do in Europe. And I thought, no, of course not. That's stupid. That's absolutely the wrong way of looking at it. These people have been here for 10 years, 20 years, 6 months. I don't care. We have got an absolute moral obligation to say, you're staying. You're staying. I don't care what happens in Europe. You're going to stay. And I thought, why have I been thinking the other way for so long? It's ridiculous.
Well, tell me why. Why do you think?
That happened within about 15 seconds.
Well, that's the biggest compliment you can pay me, obviously. But I mean, we could both be wrong now. I might have tempted you over to the dark side. I might be sort of like Darth Vader with... I've forgotten a popular culture reference. I'm getting old. But why do you think it was so entrenched and so easy to shift you from?
I think people are thinking so much about negotiations, and they're thinking about tactics, and they're thinking about this and about thinking that. And all of a sudden, I just thought to myself, hang on, this is a moral issue. It's not about we give them this, they give us that.
You're right.
And I thought, no.
It's humanity. And do you know what I think? I think the trick is, and I didn't do this consciously, but it's such a lovely thing you said. I've given it a bit of thought myself, Is it because I started talking about your hairdresser and your accountant and your kids' schoolmates, friends and that, rather than just a headline about EU nationals or migrants or work? It's when you actually bring it down to your neighbours that you realise, God, this is just horrible. This is brutal. This is callous to leave people in this sort of limbo about their own lives, their own residency.
Well, it's not everything else in life. When you personalise it and you think about an individual, you don't think about the mass. And as you say, you think about that hairdresser you've been to for 2 years and think, how's that person thinking at the moment?
Yeah.
Is he going to stay? Is he going to leave? Of course he's got to stay.
Well, I see it like that, Bob. You know I do, and you do now, but I'm perfectly respectful of people who don't. And obviously, I don't want everyone to ring in and tell me that within 15 seconds of my opening monologue, the argument ended because everybody came around to my point of view. But I'm not going to lie to you, Bob. It warms the cockles of my ageing heart when people like you have got the honesty to say stuff like that on the programme. 24 minutes after 11. Mind how you go. Pamela is in Darwin. Pamela, where's Darwin?
It's in Lancashire.
Oh, okay. Lovely. Hello. Welcome. What do you want to say, Pamela?
Just that a lot of rules have already come in about EEA nationals being able to access welfare benefits, and they're already having a massive impact.
But that was pre-Brexit. This was the thing that Cameron failed to get across to the country, wasn't it? That you couldn't just come here and sign on straight away. There'd be a 3-month waiting period, and then there'd be some sort of tests on eligibility.
Yes, but one thing that I find harder to deal with is it affects people who have already been here 18 years. I work for social landlords, so what we quite often get is the children of EEA nationals applying for their own house when they become age 20 and suddenly realising they've actually got no right to reside in the country. If their parents had worked while they were a child for 5 years, they'd have built up a permanent residence. If they haven't, then you'll get two people, one British person, their parents have never ever worked, they get full access to job seekers and a house, and a child of EEA nationals whose parents have never worked.
EEA, not EU?
EEA, yeah.
Right. Well, that's always been the case.
No, it hasn't.
When did that change?
2014.
Yeah, but when I say always, I mean pre-Brexit. Sorry, that's not linked to the referendum result, is it? What you're describing? It's just something that gives us an indication of what might happen if a similar treatment is doled out to the EU nationals. But God, yeah.
But in the same way that there is already a mechanism.
God, yes, you're
for gaining
right.
a permanent residence.
So you could have actually been here for years as an EU national, but your status shift, which means your children who were born here, no, their citizenship would be safe, wouldn't it?
Only if the parents had worked under the new rules. So to have permanent residence and access to benefits like everybody else, you need to have established permanent residence by either being the family member of a worker or, there's a lot of different criteria. But if your parents haven't had that, you could have come here age 1.5. And if your parents...
See, even I'm going to struggle to mount a defence of people's right to be here if their parents have never worked and never contributed to the national finances.
But then, speaking morally, it is the sins of the father being visited on the child.
It is. No, but baby steps. Let's look after the people who we can describe as having made a contribution, and then move on perhaps to the people who haven't. Although actually, the way you describe it is quite chilling. It must be horrible to tell people this if they didn't realise before.
Yeah, and quite often it's at the point when they're applying for their own house, and it's like, no, you can't have one, and you won't get job seekers, and but they do have a right to work.
Yes. Which is why I'm not going to lie awake at night necessarily worrying about them, but these are the distinctions that should have been drawn before the actual vote, so that you realise the benefits, if you like, of European Union membership rather than the EEA membership. Pamela, thank you. Obviously, you believe that we do have a heavy moral obligation to reassure EU nationals that they won't be forced to leave Britain. I don't want to presume that without double-checking.
There is already a mechanism in those rules, though, that if you have worked for 5 years and gain permanent residence, any decision that's made on the future of EU people in the UK can't overreach that. So if an EEA national has already gained permanent residence by working 5 years, they're already secure. If they never have, they're already insecure. They can't be forced to leave.
You're secure post-Brexit? I don't know. I mean, it just goes to show all those people saying, let's just leave, let's do it now, and then work out all the problems afterwards. You really do wonder what planet they're on. We don't even know. I mean, terrifying. Just in an objective academic sense, people like Pamela working with it, people like me reporting it. Imagine what it would be like to be living it. Eddie is in Tulse Hill. Eddie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I am a new national. I'm Portuguese, and I don't feel concerned whatsoever, to be honest.
I'm glad to hear it. I mean, I don't want you to be, but do you have family? Do you have any roots here?
I've got a wife.
And she's Portuguese as well.
She is now, not originally, but she is now.
Okay.
For quite a few years, and to be honest, I don't see that as being such a worrying thing.
In a way, you're a poster boy for freedom of movement. If you have to move, you'll move.
If I have to move, I'll move. Exactly. If I'm told to go, that means that this is not the country that I thought I was.
Okay. Here's the twist. Here's the twist, Eddie. Go on, mate.
But that's reality. I'm sure that whatever happens. In Portugal, the British nationals that live there, they're not going to be forced to go because that would be stupid, and because everyone likes them anyway. And that would affect tourism, which is one of the main industries. So I don't believe they would do that. But if that would happen here, then I would just go somewhere else.
Yes, but you were being a little disingenuous at the outset when you said you wouldn't be concerned, because then you hit us with it wouldn't be the country I thought it was. I wouldn't be concerned because I wouldn't want to live in a country that would do that.
That's not what I mean. That's not what I meant. What I mean is I'm not concerned because I don't think that that's going to happen.
Yes.
But if it did, then I would be disappointed. I would be sorry to go, but I would go.
Yes, because A, you'd have to, and B, why would you want to be in a party that nobody wants you at? Except most of us would want you here, or at least 48% of us would. It's 30 minutes off. That's not fair, actually. I think a significant majority of us would want you to stay here, however you voted. It's important if I'm going to start 2017 trying to unite the nation to get some rehearsals and practice in now. Pompous, me. Theresa May is under a heavy moral obligation. Post-Brexit, of course, and some astonishing comments by Bernard Hogan-Howe, the outgoing Chief Constable of the Metropolitan Police this morning about the spike in hate crime since Brexit. I'm delighted to tell you that the consensus at the moment on my switchboard seems to be that it is true, that British values would involve saying to our neighbours, of course you can stay. We voted for changes in the future, not a retrospective rewriting of the rules of engagement in 21st century Britain. But don't please be put off if you don't like the idea of your neighbours and your children's school friends being reassured that they can stay in the only home they've ever known. Doing it a little bit of heartstring tugging there, of course. It would also apply to somebody who arrived at the sort of front end of the year, wouldn't it? But you know what? I think we could probably live with that as well. Dot is in Haringey. Dot, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Hi, James. How are you?
Very well indeed. What do you want to say?
Well, I have lived in UK, in London, for 14 years. Moved here when I was just gone 17, and I am concerned about what's going to happen. You know, like, as you said, this is the only home I know.
Yes.
Like, I have no identity back in Poland. I have, like, no credit score, nothing. I, moved here and I start working straight away. Always worked, always paid my taxes.
Oh, mate, you don't have to say that to me.
Do you know what I mean? No,
of course I do. But there you go. That's British values. People feeling that they have to justify their very presence.
I know. No, it's not everyone. Like, I can't say that everyone says that, but that is, always comes out as not always.
Have you been worrying about it? Because the one thing I was worried about when I got to the end of that interminable introduction was that maybe I've now worried people who probably don't need to worry. I can't imagine we would turn people out of it. I just can't. Even in 2016, even in the current climate of toxicity with the enabling of race hate and all, I just can't see it happening. But the fact that the House of Lords have made the report means we have to talk about it. Is it something you've been worrying about prior to this week, prior to today? Has it been bubbling away in the back of your mind, or have we just sort of bumped it up?
No, it's been since the Brexit.
Really?
Like, a lot with everything was been happening. However, I must say I've got amazing group of friends, and majority of them are British. And
yes, of course.
They are wonderful. They are obviously, like, they're my family here, and majority of them is just what I've got. And Like, not everyone is against Europeans, and do you know what I mean? I understand that. But what happened after Brexit with, like, you know, the hate crimes stirring up so badly? It's really sad to watch, especially for someone who, you know, been here all their lives, and I you know, embrace everything about Britain. I love a lot of traditions. You know, it's my home. So
it seems as clear, doesn't it? As clear can be that you've got as much right to be here as anybody else has, if not more right. If you really want to start counting sort of years worked and tax contributions and all that sort of thing. Just briefly.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is this a little bit tabloid? I'll tell you what. I'll throw it at you, and if you think it's a little bit cheap, you just chuck it back, all right? And don't play ball. Actually, no. If you chuck it back, you will be playing ball. Just don't catch it. If I throw it at you and you think it's a bit cheeky, a bit dirty, I mean, if at some point in the next 2 or 3 years, post Article 50, post transition, post negotiation, post cliff edge, we do continue to take a collective leave of our senses as a country and tell you that you're not welcome here anymore, what happens when you get off the bus or the plane in Warsaw or Gdansk? What happens?
I don't think I would. I don't think I will go back. The reason I moved to London, the reason I stayed, is because I love the diversity of London.
Yeah, we're working on that though, Doc. We're working on that.
Yeah, but it's still...
That's next on Nigel's list. Diversity. Down with it.
I mean, it's still... London's amazing. So many amazing places, and you can, you know, experience so many different cultures, and we should embrace that. You know, you don't get that a lot in Poland. I don't think you don't get that at all, but you don't get as much as you do here. And that's what I love about it. You can, you know, and we should appreciate every different culture and everything. And
well, do you know, you keep mentioning London, actually, and I think increasingly that's kind of relevant. The larger cities, the areas where immigration has been highest, the areas where integration has been most successful, these are beacons, but they are a million miles removed from other parts of the country. Well, look, I'm not going to push you any further. I genuinely don't think it will come to that, but the failure of our Prime Minister to guarantee to people like you that it won't does seem to be a moral failure. It's amazing how you can make a speech, isn't it, about your Christian values. Now your dad's a vicar, and then tell Dot, sorry mate, just keep hoping, cross your fingers, I can't do anything. 17 years old she was when she got here, worked every year since. 31 now, we can't even say no, you're all right. Man alive. Seriously, when you let the hecklers onto the stage, that's what happens to the audience. Michael's in Waltham Abbey. Michael, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Happy Christmas to you.
Don't say that, mate. There'll be an anti-Christian backlash.
Sorry. Right. I'll tell you what, James. I will pay your next year's salary, right?
I've just signed a new contract, mate. You might want to double check that with the bank manager.
No, mate, I'm that confident. It's all hot air and utter rubbish. I'm married to a German.
Oh no, she'll be all right. If she's married to you. It's people like Dot that we're talking about. I mean, Farage is married to a German, isn't he? I know.
It is, yeah.
But it's people like Dot who've been here for 17 years, worked, you know, every one of those years, made a life here, friends of family. It's people like that I'm worried about. A little bit worried. Are you going to pay my salary if people like her get sent out of the country?
Well, James, listen, I've got a message for you. I'm old enough and experienced enough to know that what this country says and what it actually does do completely separate things. Migration down to tens of thousands. I
can't hear you, mate. It's a shame. I tell you what, save your money, buy a new phone. Dan's in Epsom. Dan, what would you like to say?
James, I'd like to say that anyone with a brain would obviously say that people obviously can stay here. I mean,
heart. It's heart, not brain, isn't it? Or is it both? It's both, heart and brain.
Well, it's both. But I do think the one thing we haven't kind of mentioned in this whole debate is that I think the reason that so many people from so many different European countries want to come here is because the EU has failed their homeland. You know, my wife's Italian, but let me tell you, in a lot of the Latin countries, particularly in Italy, not paying tax is like a national sport. It's like a national pastime. And it's the same.
Why are these two? Why are these two linked? I know the argument, and I'm sure you're not using it in a disingenuous fashion. This idea that I'm not anti-immigration, I just don't think they should be allowed to leave their own countries because of how much they'll be missed. I mean, I understand the slightly skewed logic of that position, but the European Union has benefited them if it allows freedom of movement. What you need is more homogeneity. You need more actual regulation, more things brought into line, so that the countries that currently are outliers become more like the efficient model of a German economy, or arguably in the olden days a British one.
Yeah, but if for that ever to work, you're probably more than 500 years off that ever happening. You have to. I mean, for example, you have to change cultures completely. There's no way. I'll tell you now.
To do what? To move from Italy to England?
No, to make their economies and countries as strong or as efficient as...
Yeah, but this is why I asked you how you were knitting the two together. So because Italy has a sort of history of tax avoidance and I don't know what other words you want to use, southern Italy in particular doesn't have a very strong economic history. Because of that, you've got a view on whether or not we should chuck people out of the country post-Brexit.
No, I'm saying without a shadow of a doubt, we definitely should let people stay. That's unequivocal. But we also, in the same conversation, need to say the first thing Greece should probably do is leave the EU.
Why? Why do we? It's a conversation about a heavy moral obligation. So why does it need to include economic advice to Greece?
Because I think Greece and most of Latin Europe will never, their culture will not change. They won't be able to run their...
Yeah, I'm going to ask you again, why is that relevant to a heavy moral obligation to reassure people like Dot that they can stay here?
Well, it's linked because we have to understand why so many people want to come here. Our economy is strong. We have to work out why so many people, because they'll still want to come here, even though...
But we're talking about people who are already here, Dan. Yeah, exclusively.
Okay. Yeah,
I couldn't really have made that any clearer. So for the third time of asking, why are you linking together the future of people who aren't here with the future of people who are, and the question of what our national moral duty is?
Because I think it's important to know why so many people want to come here and the future of their own...
Well, ask your wife, Dan. There you go. It's easy. People want to come here because it's great and it's nice and it's not top of the list for other European countries. It's far from the #1 destination, and the per capita intake that we've used as a nation is nowhere near as much as the readers of the Daily Express or the comment sections of the Daily Mail would believe. But in terms of what our moral obligation is, morality doesn't admit ifs and buts. Morality is about right and wrong. It's not saying, well, yes, we'll do that, but it's about saying, yes, we'll do that because it's right. Martin's in Brighton. Martin, what do you think?
I think that the conversation is almost not worth having.
Well, we're not going to have it unless you improve the quality of your fact. You mean it's a no-brainer, as the kids say?
Well, a no-brainer. I mean, the UK has always been charitable, hospitable, pluralistic.
It's 2016, Martin. I don't know if you've been catching up with the news.
Don't care. It still is. It isn't going to change something overnight. And frankly, although it's morally right, the things that will win out...
I can't. The phone line's shocking, mate. I don't know what you've done. Have you climbed down a well since you phoned into the studio? I mean, is it... So you see a heavy moral obligation on the part of the Prime Minister, but you see it even more starkly than that, and it would be an act of self-harm to throw all these people out of the country. Unfortunately, 2016 suggests that self-harm is becoming quite the latest fashion in terms of politics and economics. 11:44 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we wonder why Theresa May, this is what we'll do for the next 10 minutes, why is Theresa May not issuing this pledge, this promise, this reassurance? Why is she doing it? Because horse trading is more important than morality for the vicar's daughter? That's all I've got. Maybe you've got a slightly more charitable analysis. So you've heard Dot. We use Dot as a case study. Why wouldn't Theresa May just reassure? I mean, we're all sitting here saying it's a no-brainer. It'd be stupid. Of course, we're not going to. We might have gone a bit mad, but we're not that mad. We might have got a bit nastier, but we're not that nasty. Sorry, not buying it. Not coming with you on that journey. Optimism really bit you on the backside in 2016. You needed to back bad every time. Back bad, and you'll be quids in. So why wouldn't she do it? Why do you think she wouldn't do it? We've got a view on everything, haven't we, regarding Brexit? This is really important. This is about the fundamental psychological security of our neighbours and friends. Why wouldn't our Prime Minister just tell them that they're fine? And then the European Union wants to use them as bargaining chips. If our former partners want to use them as negotiating tactics, let them. And do you know what we can do? We can do what we used to be able to do, which is look at the rest of the world and actually feel superior. It's 11:46. Here's the thing. Theresa May has very little influence over what happens to British expats abroad once we leave the European Union, because it won't have anything to do with us anymore. We won't be involved in treaties. We won't be involved in freedom of movement. We won't be involved in collective bargaining as members of the Union. But she has absolute control over what happens to EU members living here. So the only defence, really, of her failure to reassure them that they can all stay here is a fear, perhaps, that other European Union countries would say, oh, that's great, our lot can stay in Britain, but we're going to chuck them all out of our country. There's two problems with that school of thought. The first is that we spent the entire referendum being told that British migrants were very, very different from Polish ones. British migrants were wonderful beneficiaries to the economies in which they lived, and even if they've retired to Spain, they've retired there with hundreds of thousands of pounds, and the Spanish would be mad to chuck them out, which I happen to believe is largely true about the Brits. Unfortunately, it was completely untrue about the EU migrants living here, who are also a wonderful boon to our economy and to our lives. But the second reason why it is wrong to bring the fate of the Brits abroad into the conversation about the EU nationals living here is one that I did explain at some length, but I appreciate not everybody tunes in at the top of the hour. It's because the House of Lords is talking about a heavy moral obligation. And what you do when you bring in the Brits abroad is that you bring in a political negotiation, not a moral obligation. So obviously, I believe that European Union countries have a moral obligation to tell Brits living there that they'll be fine. And I think some of them have. I should double check that. But I certainly don't think any Brits living in Germany are in fear of being deported. Give me a ring and tell me if you are on 0345 6060973. But in the absence of a proper reassurance, then Germans living here, or French people, Portuguese people, Spanish people, Italian people, Greek people, Polish people, Romanian people, all of these people living here could, if they're psychologically minded, they could be frightened of the future. No, we're all frightened of the future. If you've got your eyes open, obviously if you've got your fingers in your ears and your eyes shut, then you're probably not frightened of the future. But that's why it's a moral obligation for the vicar's daughter. 0345 6060973. And I will mention the fact that she's a vicar's daughter for one very simple reason. She does. She brings it in to the conversation about her political motivation, which is fine. But if you're going to paint yourself as somehow an upholder and espouser of Christian values, then the rest of us are allowed to point at you and say, hey, that's not very Christian, Mrs. Vicar's daughter. Carolina is in Fulham. Carolina, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'd like to say I'm a Swede who's been living here for 19 years, married to a German who's been here for 21 years. And I don't think it's realistic that anyone is going to be kicked out. But I'll tell you where our problem comes. If should I wish to return home to look after elderly parents for a few years, or even where I feel the biggest challenge is for my children who are born here, they've lived all their lives here. What happens if they want to go back to Sweden or Germany or anywhere else in the world, for example, for university? There's a very realistic possibility that they can't get back into.
No, have they got British passport?
In some quota system.
Have they got?
They don't, because I didn't take it out. Because when I
didn't realise you were going to be living in a country that needed you to.
That needed me to. I've been a foreigner here, but never meant to feel a foreigner until this year. And amassing passports seemed silly. The kids already had 3 passports. Were we going to go for a 4th? No.
What's the other one? Swedish, German, and what's the other one?
Swedish, and Canadian. They've actually got Canadian as well.
Blimey, oh, you're going to be all right.
But my point is, as of last week, they're now British citizenship. So my question to you is, are there any stats out there? How many EU citizens living in the UK are now going through this process and becoming British? And how many Brits are getting EU passports through Ireland? And is it true that Nigel Farage has applied for German citizenship?
Well, with him, it's impossible because, of course, you could ask him, but you couldn't believe a word that he said in response. The single most dishonest politician this country has ever had the humiliating experience of indulging.
This is why I'm asking.
Well, whatever. I mean, as I say, it's impossible to know the truth of the man that's incapable of recognising it when it sits on his funny little face. But here's the thing. You leave this country, live in Sweden for a while, and genuinely don't know whether you'll be allowed back in again.
I think that's a very real possibility.
Never even thought of it.
If Great Britain needs to get the numbers down, they have to put in quota systems for each country. And therefore, there'll be a quota for Swedes, a quota for Germans, a quota for French, et cetera, et cetera. And if that quota is full, even though you've lived here for 20 years, or as in the case of my children, all your life, you can't go away for university and know that you can come back to the country that you consider home 4 years later.
How worried about this have you been? Because I'm in that weird position of having sort of run the flag up the flagpole, so to speak, to see who salutes. So I don't know whether you're saluting because the flag's just appeared. I sense this is something that you've been worrying about previously.
No, well, worried enough that post-Brexit I went through the biggest administrative hassle I've done, and my children now are British citizens as of last week.
And so you've sorted your children out, so they'll be okay, but then presumably you will be because you're their parents.
Well, I feel I owe it to them. I can't, how can I
God, all of these
deny
things.
them
And
the
then people are
possibility
still
of the
saying, we
country that I
don't
chose
need to
raise them
negotiate,
in."
we don't need to conversate, we can just do it, we just trigger it and leave, we don't need to... There is so much to work out, isn't there? It's unbelievable, so much.
Endless, and it's terribly sad more than anything else, is what I would add.
Well, at least we got rid of all that red tape. Oh, no, hang on a minute. You've just described how we've ended up with even more of it than we had before, both as individuals and indeed as a country. Well, I mean, Incorrigible FCA is one of my favourite people on Twitter, Carolina. He says you should emigrate to Canada. He would. It's 11:56. This is the time. Fernando is in Cambridge. Fernando, what would you like to say?
Well, I am a Portuguese citizen, married with an Irish citizen, and we have a British daughter. I run a British charity, that helps British citizens.
Coming over here, running British charities, helping British citizens. Who the hell do you think you are?
And my wife is actually a lawyer, a very famous car show in television. And we woke up on the day after the election, or the referendum, quite shocked,
Yes.
As 48% of the population. And
I just want to stress that however we break down the vote and however accurate all the reports are, that if we did it again tomorrow, it'd go completely in the opposite direction. There is no way that everybody who voted leave would want you to leave. Okay, everyone who would want you to leave voted leave. That's like, everyone who is racist voted leave. But there's no way that everyone who voted leave is racist, or everyone who voted leave would want you to leave. And it's very important to keep making that point.
I agree. But what I wanted to say is that, as someone before already said, I got to a point that I said to myself, I'm not going to allow Theresa May or other politicians to spoil the passion I have for this country. I came here 10 years ago because I really like the country, the countryside, the culture, and it's not going to be Theresa May that is there today, but it won't be in a few years, or other politicians that come and go, that will change the way I deal with UK. So I'm not scared at all. I'm just watching it. I'm just having some fun sometimes.
But Irish is an interesting wrinkle as well, but also your child's British citizenship. It's hard to imagine circumstances in which you'd be vulnerable. But I keep going back to Dot, the 31-year-old woman who moved here from Poland 14 years ago, hasn't stopped working since, but doesn't have, unless she sort of neglected to tell us, but she doesn't have the links, the familial bonds, even the contractual security that you have, as in a marriage contract or a birth certificate. If you were on your own, living here as a Portuguese national, would you be worried that you might get turfed out at some point in the future?
I think I'm in a different position. I'm 40 years old. I'm capable to just move on and to find a place where I feel well.
Oh, man. What have we done?
It's different from vulnerable people. Those are the ones that need to be protected.
You'd be all right, in other words, because you've got transferable skills or whatever it may be, and you've got 26 countries still enjoying freedom of movement, all of which you could use as a base to build your life and nurture your family. How about that, eh? Running a British charity, helping British citizens, and worried that he might be living in a country where he's not welcome. Nice one.